Future eventually be decided in Starmer's first term, or will it take 2 terms to decide Miss Abbott's future?
What she wrote
It's just
a year
on
ago,
and on.
What she wrote a year ago was wrong.
It was the kind of TV moment that makes you forget to blink. Andrew Neil, the calm, sharp and utterly ruthless, went head-to-head with Keir Starmer, and within minutes the Labour leader's polished mask began to crack. Every deflection, every half-answer, every awkward pause turned into fuel for Neil's quiet demolition. It wasn't shouting or chaos. It was precision, the kind that leaves no room to hide. By the time it was over, viewers weren't asking whether Neil won. They were asking if Starmer could ever recover from it. Key issues on the table.
I think for Mr. Starmer it is, well, you say that, but you've said the following things over the past 5 years, none of which you now stand for. I interviewed him for the Labour leadership on the BBC. I think it was towards the end of February 2020, just before the pandemic started to hit.
The moment Andrew Neil started grilling Keir Starmer, it was clear this wasn't going to be another soft political chat. Neil went straight for the jugular: money, promises and credibility. He didn't just question policies, he questioned the man behind them. Taxes came first, and Starmer's polished tone didn't stand a chance against Neil's precision. The topic of corporate tax cuts came up, and Neil pounced. How, he asked, could Labour claim to represent working people while refusing to reverse tax breaks for the rich? Starmer tried to dance around it, mumbling about priorities and balance, but Neil wasn't having it. Every vague phrase got pinned down, every general statement turned into an awkward silence. You could almost see Starmer's brain buffering, trying to find a way to make a policy sound solid when it clearly wasn't. Then came inheritance tax and capital gains tax. Neil's favourite pressure points. He wanted numbers, not narratives. Starmer spoke about fairness and responsibility, but those words started to sound hollow as Neil reminded him of previous contradictions. The issue wasn't just about who pays what, it was about consistency. Neil made it painfully clear that Starmer's record on tax policy looked like a game of political twister. Left hand on progressivism, right hand on caution, and feet firmly planted in confusion. Viewers could feel the awkwardness oozing through the screen. Each time Neil asked whether Labour would actually reverse any of the Conservative tax cuts, Starmer dodged. The veteran journalist wasn't fooled. He kept pressing until it was obvious. There was no concrete answer, just well-rehearsed noise.
Absolutely. Secondly, the Brexit position, that came up differently in different areas. What was said in the Midlands was different to what was said in Scotland. The overload of the manifesto, people felt there was too much in it.
And that's when Neil went after the promises, or pledges, as Starmer prefers to call them. To most people, those words might sound the same, but Neil exposed the difference like a surgeon with a scalpel. He reminded Starmer that a pledge isn't a suggestion or a talking point, it's a commitment, a promise, something voters are supposed to trust. The tension thickened when Neil brought up the many pledges Starmer made during his leadership campaign for Side. Things like supporting public ownership, scrapping tuition fees, and standing up for workers' rights, all of which had mysteriously evaporated once power came within reach. The way Neil framed it, Starmer looked like a politician who collects promises the way teenagers collect playlists, easily made, quickly forgotten. But the real bombshell came when Neil started picking apart Labour's grand vision. He asked the question everyone's been wondering: are these policies fully costed, or are they just sound bites dressed as solutions? Starmer launched into a speech about fiscal responsibility, repeating the phrase like it was a magic spell. Neil let him talk himself into a corner before striking again. "Where's the math?" he demanded. "You talk about investment, reform and renewal, but where's the plan?" Starmer blinked, stumbled, and tried to redirect, but it was too late. The mask of calm competence cracked. By the end, it wasn't about one tax or one promise. Neil had drawn a much bigger picture. A party that talks about change without explaining how to pay for it, and a leader who confuses carefulness with credibility. The contrast was brutal. Neil stood for clarity. Starmer stood for calculated vagueness. And in a political world where trust is already on life support, that exchange hit harder than any campaign ad ever could. Watching it unfold, you couldn't help but feel that Starmer's pledges had turned into liabilities, words that once won him support now hanging around his neck like weights he can't shake off. How he attacked Andrew Neil doesn't interview politicians, he dissects them. The man's tone alone could make a cabinet minister break into a sweat. From the moment he locked eyes with Keir Starmer, it was clear he'd come to expose the cracks, not polish the image. Neil started slow, calm, almost polite, the way a cat watches a bird before pouncing. Then, without warning, he went in. Every question was a trap. Every follow-up, a twist of the knife. Starmer tried to play it cool, offering rehearsed lines about Labour's priorities, but Neil had done his homework. He interrupted at just the right moments, cutting through the political jargon with surgical precision. You could see the confidence drain from Starmer's face each time Neil pushed back with, "That's not what you said before, is it?"
And he went through a whole range of things: nationalised rail, mail, energy, and so on, abolish universal credit, abolish university tuition fees, wealth tax, and all the rest of it.
Neil's real genius wasn't in shouting or grandstanding, it was in precision. He used Starmer's own words against him, quoting old speeches, leadership pledges, and interviews. It wasn't just an argument, it was a cross-examination. And for a man who once ran Britain's Crown Prosecution Service, Starmer suddenly looked like a witness under pressure. When Neil asked about Labour's so-called fully funded plans, Starmer started rattling off vague buzzwords about investment and growth. Neil let him finish, then calmly reminded him that none of those plans had actually been costed. The silence that followed was excruciating. You could almost hear the producers in the control room holding their breath. What made Neil so effective was his refusal to play along with political theatre. He didn't let Starmer talk over him or escape into platitudes. Each time Starmer tried to dodge, Neil pulled him right back, forcing clarity. When Starmer talked about fairness, Neil asked, "Define it." When Starmer mentioned working people, Neil pressed, "Who are they exactly?" And when Starmer started quoting statistics, Neil demanded the sources. It was brutal, methodical, and relentless. Starmer's carefully crafted calm began to crack, replaced by that telltale, nervous smile, the one every politician wears when they know they've lost control of the narrative.
Votes have gone to those who have the most clarity. So if you're really for Leave, you get the votes.
Yeah. Farage, who's a very good communicator.
At one point, Neil even brought up Starmer's time as Director of Public Prosecutions, a period often painted as his badge of integrity. Neil, however, used it as ammunition. "If you were so strong on justice then," he asked, "why are you so weak on it now?" Starmer blinked. Hard. He tried to deflect, saying he believed in a balanced approach, but the damage was done. Neil's question wasn't about law, it was about leadership. And in that moment, Starmer looked less like a man ready to lead and more like someone desperately trying not to fall apart on live TV. By the end of the exchange, Neil didn't need to raise his voice or deliver a grand finale. His victory was in the silence, the quiet moments when Starmer had no real answers, just filler words and forced composure. Neil's method was simple but devastating. Expose contradictions, demand evidence, and never let emotion cloud the facts. It was like watching a chess match where one player didn't realise the game had already ended 3 moves ago. And as Starmer sat there blinking, searching for footing, Andrew Neil just leaned back, that familiar smirk forming, as if to say, "You walked right into it." Starmer's responses and weak points
requires us to define what the task is, which is huge, a massive challenge.
Which we're going to talk about.
And to ask the members, put myself before the members, to win that competition.
Keir Starmer has built his reputation on being calm, rational and unflappable. The man who never loses his cool, no matter how tough the question. But under Andrew Neil's relentless interrogation, that calm started to look more like paralysis. Each answer Starmer gave sounded polished at first, almost rehearsed, but the longer Neil kept pressing, the more it became clear that Polish couldn't hide the cracks. Starmer's biggest weakness wasn't that he didn't know his brief, it was that he knew it too well. He spoke like a lawyer trapped in courtroom language, dodging with precision but never truly connecting. You could see it in his face, the blank pauses, the rapid blinking, the awkward smiles. It was like watching someone realise mid-interview that their script no longer matches the questions. When Neil asked directly about reversing the corporate tax cuts, Starmer's response was a masterclass in evasion. He began by acknowledging the need for public services, then shifted to responsible spending, and somehow ended up talking about long-term fiscal growth. Neil cut through it all with a simple follow-up. "So yes or no?" And Starmer froze. That was his pattern throughout the exchange. Long explanations, confident openings, and no actual answers. It wasn't that he didn't want to commit, it was that he couldn't. Every decision seemed to come wrapped in a disclaimer, and Neil tore each one open in real time. You could almost feel the tension building as Starmer's talking points collapsed under the weight of Neil's questions. Even worse, his body language betrayed him. Each time Neil interrupted with a correction or a challenge, Starmer's posture stiffened. His jaw clenched, his voice dipped slightly, and that signature calmness started to feel performative. At one point, Neil questioned whether Labour's fully funded plans had any substance at all. Starmer smiled awkwardly and began with, "Well, Andrew, we've been very clear." The irony, of course, was that he hadn't. That line, "We've been clear," became the nervous tick of the night, a filler phrase that said everything and nothing at once. Then came the breaking point. Neil asked about the difference between pledges and promises. To most viewers, it might have seemed like a minor semantic detail, but for Starmer, it was a trap disguised as a question. When he tried to defend his position by calling pledges intentions, Neil cut him off mid-sentence. "Intentions aren't leadership, Sir Keir," he snapped. The camera caught Starmer blinking rapidly, his confidence evaporating. In that split second, the careful image he'd spent years building, the competent, composed leader, began to crumble. And yet, the most painful part wasn't the mistakes themselves. It was the realization that Starmer didn't seem to notice he was losing. He kept answering as if he was still in control, unaware that Neil had already turned the conversation into a slow-motion dismantling of his credibility. His refusal to speak plainly, to just say yes or no, made him look like exactly what Neil was implying, a man so afraid of being wrong that he says nothing at all. By the end, Starmer's performance felt less like a political interview and more like a public unravelling. Every time he tried to sound strong, he came off evasive. Every time he tried to show confidence, it felt calculated. Andrew Neil didn't need to destroy him. Starmer did that himself by refusing to give the one thing Neil demanded, a straight answer, the fallout.
Well, let me tell you what a lot of people, because you're reluctant to say what Charlie Faulkner thinks you think, and that is, you're reluctant because a large part of the Labour membership still worships Jeremy Corbyn.
When the lights dimmed and the interview wrapped, the damage was already done. You could sense it, that heavy silence that follows political disaster. Andrew Neil walked away calm and collected, his reputation as Britain's toughest interviewer intact. Keir Starmer, though, looked like a man who'd just been hit by a slow-motion train. Within hours, clips of the interview flooded social media. "Starmer destroyed," read one headline. "Neil exposes Labour's empty promises," said another. The video racked up millions of views. Before the end of the day, and by nightfall, even Starmer's own supporters were forced to admit it. This wasn't just a tough interview, it was a political autopsy. Inside Labour HQ, panic set in. Advisers scrambled to clarify his answers, spinning Neil's precision into an aggressive line of questioning, code for "we have no defence." Journalists called it the Starmer blink, referring to how often he seemed to freeze mid-question, eyes darting, mouth half open. It became a meme within hours. On Twitter, one user captioned a clip of his awkward pause with "loading leadership.stxr." The internet can be cruel, but this time it felt almost fair. Neil hadn't humiliated him with theatrics, he'd simply stripped away the veneer, revealing a leader who looked less ready to govern and more ready to file paperwork.
Didn't understand the difference between promise and pledge. I thought they're the same thing, but it doesn't matter what it means because he's broken them all. So I think that's a problem for him.
What made the fallout worse was that Starmer had gone into the interview confident. He expected a standard grilling. A few tough questions, a few jokes, then a clean exit. What he got was an ambush of intellect. Neil knew exactly which threads to pull. The pledges, the tax cuts, the half-costed promises. Each was a loose end, and Neil yanked until the entire image unravelled. Even supporters in Labour's inner circle privately admitted that Starmer came across as evasive and robotic. He looked like a barrister trapped in a public debate, one insider told The Guardian. Too cautious, too defensive, not human enough. Meanwhile, political commentators couldn't resist the theatre of it all. Andrew Neil's name trended for 2 straight days. Pundits compared the interview to a public execution. Precise, merciless and unforgettable. Right-wing outlets gloated, calling it proof that Labour still had no coherent plan. Left-wing voices tried to rally, arguing that Starmer held his own. But even that defence rang hollow. You could tell everyone saw the same thing. A leader so afraid to make a mistake that he made one big one, showing he had nothing real to say. The public reaction was split, but intense. Some saw Neil's questioning as the necessary wake-up call for a party that's been hiding behind slogans. Others thought it was too harsh, even cruel. But either way, the interview did what Starmer's campaign speeches couldn't. It got people talking, and not in the way he'd hoped. Instead of headlines about Labour's vision for Britain, every outlet ran stories about Starmer's lack of conviction. By the end of the week, Starmer tried to do damage control. He gave follow-up interviews, carefully clarifying points, insisting his answers had been misinterpreted. But the moment had passed. The clip of Neil raising an eyebrow while Starmer fumbled a response was already cemented in public memory, a defining image of a leader caught between fear and indecision. Andrew Neil didn't just win an interview that night, he redefined the narrative. And for Keir Starmer, the man who built his brand on calm competence, it was the kind of loss that lingers long after the cameras stop rolling. The bigger picture.
Well, it was a devastating defeat. You're absolutely right about that. The worst for a very long time.
85 years.
We've actually lost 4 in a row, and therefore, whilst we're analysing why we lost that election...
The interview wasn't just another tense TV moment. It became a turning point in how people saw Keir Starmer. Up until that night, he'd managed to maintain his image as the grown-up in the room. Calm, measured, and supposedly capable of steering Britain out of chaos. But Andrew Neil shattered that illusion in less than half an hour. What viewers saw wasn't composure, it was calculation. Every pause, every hedged answer, every nervous smile screamed one thing: fear. Fear of saying too much, fear of taking a side, fear of being wrong, and that's deadly for a politician who's supposed to look like a leader. Neil's takedown didn't just expose Starmer's weaknesses, it exposed Labour's entire problem. A party that talks endlessly about values, but struggles to define them. A movement that promises change, but never says what kind. Neil's interview distilled that disconnect into one uncomfortable truth. Labour doesn't sound like it believes in anything anymore. When Starmer talked about taxes, healthcare, or working people, it wasn't passion driving his words, it was performance. He sounded like someone reciting lines from a script he didn't write, and Neil, with his trademark smirk and forensic style, made sure everyone at home could see it.
That tells you nothing about voting behaviour. How did you vote in the 2016 referendum now determines to a large extent how you will vote.
The fallout hit deeper because the timing couldn't have been worse. Britain's economy is fragile, voters are angry, and the Tories are imploding. It should have been Starmer's moment to shine, his chance to look decisive, commanding, ready to lead. Instead, the interview made him look like the opposite, a man terrified of committing to anything real. The contrast between Neil's sharpness and Starmer's hesitation made Labour's entire front bench look small. Angela Rayner's fiery theatrics suddenly felt hollow. The party's promises of competence and stability rang empty. It was as if Neil had turned on the lights in a room that Labour had spent years keeping dim. Public trust, that fragile currency of politics, took another hit. People don't want perfection, they want conviction. They want someone who believes in something enough to risk being wrong. And what Neil exposed was a leader who seems allergic to conviction. His every answer was focus grouped, tested and sterilised until it meant nothing. Watching him shrink under Neil's questions felt like watching the slow death of authenticity in British politics. No wonder social media exploded. Memes, jokes, think pieces. Everyone had an opinion, but most agreed on one thing: Starmer got caught pretending to lead. And here's the real sting. Andrew Neil didn't just destroy Keir Starmer. He revealed what so many people already suspected but couldn't quite put into words. That behind the calm exterior and polished sound bites, there's a hollowness. A man more afraid of mistakes than inspired by purpose. A politician so focused on appearing safe that he's forgotten leadership isn't about safety at all. It's about courage. By the next morning, political commentators were calling the interview Starmer's unravelling. It wasn't just a bad night, it was a warning. If a single journalist can dismantle your credibility in one conversation, what will happen when real crises hit? That's the question everyone's asking now, because after Andrew Neil's televised demolition, Keir Starmer didn't just lose control of the interview, he lost control of his image. And that, in politics, is the one thing you can never afford to lose. So, Tards, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.